I overheard my son whispering to his wife, "Don't worry, she'll never figure out what we did." I smiled to myself because I'd already found everything. That night they came over for dinner as usual. But when they walked in and saw what was waiting for them, my son went pale and his wife started crying. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax, let's begin. The words reached me as I was carrying the dessert plates from the kitchen. They were not meant for my ears, a low, hurried murmur from the hallway leading to the front door. My son's voice, Marcus, tempered with a reassurance that felt like a physical blow. "Don't worry," he said, the sound barely traveling the distance. "She'll never figure out what we did." There was a soft, feminine sigh. Chloe, my daughter-in-law. I did not catch her reply. The plates in my hands, my mother's good china, did not rattle. My feet continued their path from the linoleum of the kitchen to the rug of the dining room. The transition in texture under my slippers was the only thing I allowed myself to feel. My face arranged itself into the pleasant, expectant expression of a hostess bringing in the final course. I placed the slice of peach cobbler before Chloe first, then Marcus, then set my own plate down. "It smells wonderful, Ellie," Chloe said. Her smile was bright, practiced. She picked up her dessert fork. "You outdid yourself, Mom," Marcus added. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of a satisfied man. He had just finished telling me about his latest client, a detail I could now only recall as noise. I sat. "It's just the old recipe." My voice sounded normal in my own ears, distant but normal. I picked up my fork and pressed the tines into the flaky crust. Steam rose from the incision. The conversation continued. They talked about a new restaurant downtown, about the reupholstering of their sofa. Their words were bubbles floating past me, meaningless. I nodded at what seemed like appropriate intervals. I tasted the cobbler. It was perfect, sweet and tart with a hint of cinnamon, but it had no flavor. My mind was a white, silent room where one sentence played on a loop. "She'll never figure out what we did." What we did. The pronoun was a collaboration. It was the two of them united. The object was an action completed. The subject, the one who would never figure it out, was me. I watched Marcus's mouth move as he complimented the coffee. These were the lips that had formed that devastating certainty. This was the man I had raised, fed, soothed, cheered. His hand, now gesturing broadly about investment portfolios, was the hand I had held crossing streets. I saw them now as a unit. Chloe reached over and adjusted the collar of his shirt, a gesture of possession. He accepted it passively. Their alliance was clear, and I was on the outside of it. The betrayal was not a heat. It was a cold hollow opening beneath my ribs. I kept my spine straight, a habit of a lifetime. The rest of the dinner was a study in endurance. I asked about their work. I complimented Chloe's bracelet. I filled the silence with the trivial script of a family visit. When Marcus glanced at his watch, a sleek silver thing that cost more than my first car, I felt a surge of relief so acute it almost made me dizzy. "We should probably head out," he said, pushing his chair back. "Big day tomorrow." "Of course," I said, rising with them. "Don't let me keep you." The rituals of departure were performed. Chloe's quick, perfunctory hug, her perfume a cloud of jasmine and ambition. Marcus's stronger embrace, which I endured, my arms remaining loose at my sides. I walked them to the door, the same door where the words had been spoken not an hour before. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," Marcus said, stepping onto the porch. "It was lovely," Chloe chirped. "Drive safely," I replied and closed the door. The lock clicked into place with a solid, final sound. I stood there, my forehead resting against the cool wood. The house, which had been full of their voices and movement, was now profoundly empty and loud. The whisper was louder now, echoing in the stillness. I turned and walked back to the dining room. The scene was a fossil of the evening. 3 empty dessert plates smudged with peach filling, crumpled linen napkins, coffee cups holding dark dregs. I began to clear the table. My hands were steady. I stacked the plates, gathered the silverware. I carried everything to the kitchen and set it in the sink. I ran the water hot and watched it steam. I washed each piece methodically, the familiar task at anchor in a suddenly unmoored world. The suds were white and thick. I rinsed each plate until it squeaked under my fingers. After the kitchen was spotless, the dish towel hung neatly on its bar, I turned off the lights. I did not go upstairs to my bedroom. Instead, I walked into the living room. I did not turn on a lamp. The only illumination came from the streetlight filtering through the lace curtains, casting a faint, geometric pattern on the rug. I sat in my armchair, the one that had been my husband's. The worn velvet welcomed me. I folded my hands in my lap and looked into the darkness. What we did. The question was no longer if asterisk they had wronged me, but how. The scope was unknown, which made it infinite. Was it my feelings, my belongings, my security, my past? The cold hollow inside me began to fill with a slow, meticulous energy. It was not rage. It was a focused curiosity, the same kind I used to employ when faced with a disorganized archive or a box of unsorted family papers. A puzzle to be solved. The initial, paralyzing hurt was being compartmentalized, set aside for later examination. Right now, I needed data. I replayed the last 6 months in my mind. Their visits, which had become less frequent but more lavish in the gifts they brought, expensive cheeses, bottles of wine I never opened. Their conversations, which had subtly shifted from sharing news to offering unsolicited advice on simplifying my life, on financial planning for my later years. Chloe's comments about this house being too much for one person. Marcus's offer, just 2 weeks ago, to help me consolidate some of my old accounts and paperwork, to take things off my plate. I had seen it as concern, a clumsy, modern expression of love. I had patted his hand and told him I had everything under control. He had smiled and dropped the subject. Sitting in the dark, I saw that smile differently. The whisper had not been one of fear, but of confidence. It was the sound of 2 people who believed they were smarter, more clever than the woman who had baked their cobbler. They saw my quiet life, my silver hair, my books and my garden, and they mistook it for simplicity. They confused kindness with blindness. A calm settled over me, deeper than the earlier shock. It was the calm of a decision made. They were wrong. I would figure it out, every last detail. I am a retired archivist. My profession was built on finding order in chaos, on uncovering the truth hidden in misplaced documents and forgotten ledgers. I know how to look. I know how to follow a trail. I know that the story is always in the paperwork. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11, its tone deep and measured. I stood up from the chair. My body felt stiff but resolved. I walked to the small, cherrywood desk in the corner of the room, a wedding gift from a lifetime ago. I turned on the brass lamp. The pool of light was warm and precise. I pulled out the chair and sat down. I opened the top drawer. Inside were pens, note cards, a magnifying glass I used for fine print. I took out a fresh, legal-sized notepad. At the top of the first page, I wrote the date. Beneath it, I wrote 2 names, Marcus, Chloe. Then, on the next line, I wrote a single, clear question. What did they do? I would start tomorrow. I would begin with the obvious places: bank statements, tax files, the safe deposit box key taped to the back of my address book. I would look for the anomalies, the small cracks in the facade of my orderly life. The whisper had given me the only clue I needed, that there was something to find. I closed the notepad. The house was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was no longer empty. It was full of purpose. I turned off the lamp and made my way upstairs in the dark, my path sure and familiar. I would sleep, and in the morning I would begin my work. The morning light entered the room in a clean, sharp rectangle across my desk. I had slept for 5 hours, a deep and dreamless sleep that felt more like a system shutdown than rest. Now, with the notepad open before me and a cup of peppermint tea steaming at my elbow, I began. I started with the digital. I logged into my primary bank account, the one I used for household expenses and my pension deposit. The login process was automatic, my fingers typing the password without conscious thought. I navigated to the statements from the last 6 months. I examined each line, not reading for comprehension, but for pattern, for anomaly. I had done this work for decades with historical ledgers and personal correspondence. A bank statement was simply another archival document. The pension deposits were consistent. The utility payments, the grocery store charges, the occasional purchase from the garden center, all were familiar. Then I saw it. A transfer dated 3 months prior. It was not large, $487.16. It was listed as an electronic payment to Home Secure Pro. I stared at the name. I had no subscription to any service by that name. I had not authorized any such payment. I wrote the date and amount on my notepad. I circled it. I then checked the 2 months following. The same charge appeared again, each time for the same amount. 3 payments total. I felt a cold precision settle in my mind. This was a thread. I would pull it. My next action was to call the bank. I used the landline on my desk. The wait was short. I provided my account information and answered the security questions. "How can I help you today, Ms. Vance?" the representative asked. "I'm reviewing my statements, and I see recurring electronic payments to Home Secure Pro. I did not authorize these. Can you tell me what this company is, or provide a contact number from the transaction record?" There was a pause, the sound of keystrokes. "I see those transactions. They were set up as automatic drafts. The company listing is sparse. I can provide you with a phone number associated with the enrollment." She read it out. I wrote it down. "I can also dispute these charges and begin the process to block future ones if you'd like." "Please do that," I said. My voice was calm, administrative. "And can you tell me what device or IP address was used to enroll this service?" Another pause, longer this time. "For security reasons, we can't disclose specific IP addresses, but I can see the enrollment was initiated from a mobile device. The initial verification was done via text message to the phone number on file." The phone number on file was my own, my cell phone, which I remembered Marcus had updated for me about 4 months ago, complaining that my old one was too slow. He had transferred my data to the new one himself. He had held my phone, inputting settings. The cold feeling spread from my mind to my chest. "I understand," I said. "Please proceed with the dispute and the block. Thank you." I ended the call and looked at the number I had written. It was a local area code. I did not dial it, not yet. First, I needed the physical evidence. I left the desk and went upstairs to my bedroom. I went to the tall dresser that had been my husband Robert's. The top drawer where he kept his personal items had not been fully emptied. I opened it. There, in a small velvet tray, were his cufflinks, a tie clip, a few foreign coins. I moved these aside. The space behind the tray was empty. His watch was not there. It was a simple, elegant timepiece, a Hamilton he had saved for. He wore it every day of our married life until his illness. It was not valuable to a pawnshop, perhaps, but it was valuable to me. Its absence was a quiet, profound shout in the still room. I had last seen it there on the anniversary of his death, when I took it out to hold, to feel its weight. That was 8 months ago. I closed the drawer. I walked into the guest room, which had been Marcus's room. It was now neutral, with a sewing machine in the corner and boxes of Christmas decorations on the closet shelf. Nothing seemed disturbed. I then went to the small study that housed my filing cabinet and my collection of first edition novels from the Harlem Renaissance behind glass doors. The doors were locked. The key was in the porcelain dish on my desk downstairs. I had checked it last night. It was still there. I unlocked the glass doors. The books stood in their orderly rows. I did not need to count them. I knew each spine. They were all present. I ran a finger along their tops. No dust. This shelf was my ritual, cleaned every Saturday. I closed and relocked the doors. Returning to my desk, I added to my notes. Missing, Robert's Hamilton watch. Last confirmed location, his dresser approx. 8 months ago. Beneath it, I wrote, unauthorized charges, Home Secure Pro $487.16 X3, enrolled via my cell phone 4 months ago. The connection was Marcus. Both events orbited his presence, his offered help. The watch's disappearance was less definite. I could have misplaced it, though I knew I had not. The bank charges were a fact. A small fact, but a fact. I needed a larger document. I retrieved the small key taped inside my address book. It was for my safe deposit box at the local branch. I had not visited it in over a year. The contents were specific: our marriage certificate, Robert's military discharge papers, the deed to the house, and the deed to the small rental property we had bought as an investment 30 years ago, a duplex on the other side of town that provided a modest, steady income. I drove to the bank. The process was familiar. I signed the ledger, was escorted by a clerk into the vault, and used my key with the bank's key to open the long, narrow box. I carried it to a private room. The marriage certificate was on top, in its faded envelope. Beneath it were the discharge papers. Next should have been the two deeds, held together with a paper clip. I lifted the discharge papers. Only one deed remained. It was for my house. The deed for the rental property was gone. I placed every document from the box on the table. I went through them one by one, then shook the empty box. Nothing. The deed was not there. A concrete object, a legal document of clear importance, was missing from a secured location to which only I had the key. But that was not precisely true. A year and a half ago, when I had a bad case of the flu, Marcus had offered to fetch my tax documents from the box. I had given him my key. He had returned with the papers I needed and the key. I had thanked him. I had not checked the box's contents afterwards. I saw no reason to. I sat in the sterile privacy of the bank room. The air conditioning hummed. I looked at the empty space in the stack of papers where the second deed should have been. This was no longer a suspicion. This was evidence of a deliberate action. The whisper in my hallway now had a shape. It was taking the form of paper, of numbers, of absences. I placed all the remaining documents back into the box, closed it, and returned it to its slot. I drove home, my hands steady at 10 and 2 on the wheel. The anger was there, but it was a solid, cold block, like a stone I could hold. It was manageable. It was useful. Back at my desk, I made a new entry. Missing, deed to 2147 Elmwood Drive, rental property. Last confirmed in SDB 18 months ago. Marcus had sole access 16 months ago. I drew a line connecting this entry to the others. The pattern was no longer emerging. It had emerged. It was financial. It was premeditated. It involved the theft of a document that represented my financial security. The small charges on my bank account were a test, a probe of my vigilance. The missing watch was perhaps a cover, a trivial theft to distract from the larger one, or simply an opportunity taken. I leaned back in my chair. The tea was cold. I looked at the network of notes on the page. This was my archive of betrayal. It was incomplete, but its direction was clear. I needed the full picture. I needed to know what they had done with my property. But first, I needed to be sure. I needed irrefutable proof that would exist outside of this notepad, in the world of records and offices. I picked up the phone again. I dialed the number for the county clerk's office. When a woman answered, I said, "I'd like to inquire about the current ownership records for a property. Can you tell me how to request a copy of a deed?" The woman at the county clerk's office provided clear instructions. I could submit a request by mail or in person. I chose to go in person. I needed to see the document with my own eyes. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. I parked in a municipal lot and walked to the gray stone building. The interior was cool and echoed with the sound of heels on marble floors. I found the correct office, took a number, and waited on a wooden bench. My posture was straight. My hands were folded over the handles of my purse. I observed the people coming and going, the clerks behind the counter, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. It was a place of records, of facts. I felt at home here. When my number was called, I approached the counter. A young man with glasses looked up. "How can I help you?" "I would like to obtain a copy of the current deed for a property," I said. I gave him the address of my rental duplex on Elmwood Drive. "I am the owner of Record Eleanor Vance." I placed my driver's license on the counter. He typed into his computer. His expression remained neutral, then shifted slightly. He looked at my license, then back at the screen. "1 moment, please." He turned and spoke to an older woman at a desk behind him. She came over, glanced at the screen, then at me. "Ms. Vance, you said you're the current owner," the woman asked. "I have owned the property since 1992, I replied. She nodded slowly. "The system shows a transfer of title recorded 6 weeks ago." The air in the room did not change, but I felt the temperature drop. "A transfer to whom?" She peered at the screen. The grantee is listed as M&C Holdings, LLC. She spelled it out. The grantor is listed as Alina Vance. The document is recorded. Would you like a certified copy? Yes, please. My voice was even. I paid the fee. I waited while the older woman printed the document from a large printer behind her. She stamped it, placed it in a manila envelope, and handed it to me across the counter. Here you are. Thank you. I took the envelope. I did not open it there. I walked out of the building back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine off. The envelope lay on the passenger seat. I looked at it for a full minute before picking it up. I slid the document out. It was a photocopy of the filed deed. At the top, the words warranty deed were in bold type. I scanned the legal description. It was my property. I looked at the grantee section, M&C Holdings, LLC, Marcus and Chloe. It was not subtle. My eyes moved to the signature line for the grantor. There was a signature above the printed name Alina Vance. I stared at it. It was a good forgery. It had the general slope of my handwriting, the shape of the capital E and the V, but it was wrong. The pressure was inconsistent. The loop in the L was too tight. My signature, developed over a lifetime of signing documents as an archivist, had a specific, fluid rhythm. This was a drawing of my signature, not the act of signing. I had not signed this paper. I had not appeared before a notary. I looked at the notary section. A seal was stamped and a signature was scrawled below it. The notary's name was unfamiliar. The date was 6 weeks ago, a Thursday. I had been at my book club that Thursday. We had discussed beloved asterisk. I had made lemon bars. I held the paper. My hands did not tremble. The cold, solid anger within me crystallized. This was not an impulse. This was not a desperate act. It was a plan. They had taken the physical deed from my safe deposit box. They had created a limited liability company, a business entity. They had forged my signature. They had found a complicit or careless notary to stamp it. They had filed it with the county, transferring the ownership of my asset into their own controlled entity. All while eating my meals, accepting my hugs, reassuring each other in my hallway. The scale of the betrayal was now a measurable fact. It was no longer about a watch or a few $100s. It was about the theft of a property that represented 30 years of mortgage payments, of repairs, of saving. It was my security. It was the result of my labor and Robert's labor. They had stolen it with the calm efficiency of professionals. I thought of Marcus's face as he told me not to worry about my finances. I thought of Chloe complimenting my quaint little house, her eyes already calculating the value of everything in it. They had seen me as a ledger to be balanced, an asset to be liquidated. Their confidence that I would never figure it out was rooted in their perception of me as old, as passive, as a woman defined by her cobbler and her books. I placed the deed back into the envelope. I started the car and drove home. The route was automatic. My mind was not on the road. It was constructing a timeline, a chain of evidence. At home, I went directly to my desk. I opened my notepad to a fresh page. I wrote chronology at the top. I began to list events in order, based on the evidence I had. 1. Approx. 8 months ago. Robert's watch goes missing after a visit from M&C. 2. 4 months ago. Marcus updates my phone. Unauthorized charges to Home Secure Pro begin soon after. 3. 6 weeks ago. Forged deed transferring Elmwood property to M&C Holdings, LLC is filed with county. 4. 3 days ago. Overheard conversation. She'll never figure out what we did. The unauthorized charges were a side operation, perhaps a way to generate small, untraceable income using my account. The watch was a token. The property was the main objective. They had likely already begun to collect the rental income from my tenants, the couple who had lived in the duplex for 5 years. I needed to verify that. I found the tenant's contact number in my files. I called. The wife answered. "Hello, Diane, it's Alina Vance." "Oh, hello, Alina, how are you?" Her voice was warm. "I'm well, thank you. I'm doing some year-end accounting and just wanted to confirm your rent payment for last month went to the correct account. I've been hearing about banking errors." "Oh, sure, let me check." I heard the rustle of paper. "We sent it to the new management company, like the letter said. M&C Holdings. We mailed the check to the P.O. box listed. A letter, they had sent my tenants a letter. Of course, that's right, I said, my voice light. I just wanted to double check. Thank you, Diane. Everything else is all right with the unit. We spoke for another minute about a leaky faucet she had already fixed. I ended the call. So it was complete. They had severed the income stream from me and redirected it to themselves. They had become my landlords. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I added to my chronology. Tenants redirected to send rent to M&C Holdings via letter. I drew a box around the entire sequence. The picture was clear, ugly, and complete. The sorrow was there, a deep, hollow ache beneath my ribs, but it was being overshadowed, pushed down by something more potent, a cold, clean resolve. The emotional wound would have to wait. First, there was justice to be secured. The proof was in my hands. The forged deed was not just a theft, it was a felony. I had the evidence. Now I needed a plan. I looked at the notepad, at the boxed-in chronology of my son's betrayal. The initial phase of my investigation was over. The question was no longer, what did they do? It was, what will I do about it? I closed the notepad. I placed the photocopied deed back in its envelope and filed it in the top drawer of my desk, under a folder labeled Tax Documents 2010. It would be safe there. Then I stood and walked to the kitchen. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. I would have another cup of tea. I would think. The next move required careful consideration. It would not be made in anger. It would be made with the same precision they had used against me. But my precision would be backed by truth. The tea steeped, darkening the water. I stood at the kitchen window and watched a cardinal land on the fence. The red was vivid against the green of the ivy. My mind was not on the bird. It was on the forged signature, the P.O. box, the absolute certainty in my son's whisper. I did not want to scream. I did not want to cry. Those were reactions, and reactions could be managed, dismissed, twisted. I wanted a result. I wanted the theft acknowledged and reversed. I wanted the smug confidence wiped from their faces and replaced with the shame they had earned. Most of all, I wanted my peace back. That peace would not be found in a shouting match or a police station visit, not yet. It would be found in a controlled, undeniable confrontation where the truth had no escape route. I took my tea to the desk. I opened the drawer and took out the envelope from the county clerk. I laid it flat. Beside it, I placed my notepad with the chronology. This was the nucleus of their betrayal. I needed to build my case around it. I began to assemble a physical archive. I made copies of my bank statements, highlighting the unauthorized HomeSecure Pro charges. I printed out the email confirmation from the bank showing the dispute had been filed. I wrote a concise note on a separate sheet. 3 unauthorized electronic withdrawals totaling $1,461.48, enrolled via my cell phone after Marcus performed an update on the device. I went to the living room and took a photograph of the empty space in Robert's dresser drawer where his watch had been. I printed the photo. On the back, I wrote, "Missing Hamilton wristwatch, last seen here 8 months ago after a visit from Marcus and Chloe." I created a clean document on my computer. I titled it Inventory of Concerns. I did not call it Evidence of Theft. The tone was important. It was a list of discrepancies I had discovered, presented without accusation but with irrefutable fact. I listed each item: the watch, the bank charges, the missing deed, the forged transfer to M&C Holdings LLC, the redirected rent. For each, I noted the date I had discovered it and any relevant connection, such as Marcus's access to my phone or the safe deposit box key. I printed 3 copies. Next, I needed a forum. A public scene would be gratuitous. A lawyer's office would cede control to a third party. The police were a future option, but not my first choice. I wanted to look into their eyes when they understood that I knew. I wanted to see the collapse of their secret. The location needed to be a place of my strength, a place where they felt safe in their deception. My home, my dining room, where they had eaten my food and whispered their assurances. I picked up my phone. I navigated to Marcus's number. My finger hovered for a moment. Then I pressed the call button. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Hey, Mom." His voice was breezy, underscored with the faint impatience of someone busy. "Hello, Marcus. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, it's fine. What's up?" "I was thinking of having a family dinner this Sunday," I said. I kept my voice warm, slightly wistful. "It's been a while since we all sat down together. I'm making that pot roast you like." There was a brief pause. I could almost hear the silent consultation with Chloe, the weighing of convenience against keeping up appearances. Yeah, Sunday should work. What time?" 6 o'clock, I said. "Nothing fancy, just the three of us." "Sounds good, Mom. We'll be there." "I'll see you then. Give my love to Chloe." I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the desk. The invitation was issued. The clock was now ticking, 1 week. The following days took on a new rhythm. My investigation was over. Now was the time of preparation. I bought the ingredients for the pot roast, the carrots, the potatoes. I selected a bottle of wine from the rack, a red from a local vineyard. These were props in a play I was directing. In the afternoons, I worked in my garden. It was late summer and the roses needed deadheading. I put on my gloves, took my pruning shears, and walked down the brick path. The sun was warm on my back. I examined each rose bush, identifying the spent blooms, the ones that had given their color and were now brown and brittle. I placed the blades of the shears at the base of the dead flower stem, just above a set of healthy leaves, and snipped. The cut was clean. The dead weight fell away. I moved from bush to bush. With each cut, I thought of the elements of my plan. The forged deed was the central, dead bloom. The bank charges were another. The watch, a smaller one. Each needed to be cleanly removed from the narrative they had constructed, the narrative of my ignorance. As I pruned, I felt a clarity settle over me. This was not an act of aggression. It was an act of restoration. A garden left untended becomes choked, the healthy growth hampered by the dead. My family, what was left of it, had become choked with their deception. On Sunday, I would prune it. I finished in the garden and went inside. I took the 3 folders I had purchased, simple, manila, and labeled them neatly with a black pen. Folder 1, financial discrepancies. Folder 2, property records. Folder 3, personal effects. I placed the corresponding documents inside. The folders were not thick, but their contents were dense with implication. I placed the folders in the bottom drawer of my desk. They would wait there until Sunday afternoon. My daily life continued outwardly unchanged. I attended my book club. We discussed the color purple. I listened to the conversations, contributed my thoughts, and drank my tea. The normality of it was a shield. No one suspected the quiet calculation happening beneath the surface. My friend Brenda, a retired lawyer, asked if I was feeling tired. I told her I had been sleeping poorly, which was true. She suggested chamomile. I thanked her. The night before the dinner, I slept well. There was no anxiety, only a quiet anticipation. The decision was made. The path was clear. All that remained was the execution. On Sunday morning, I woke at my usual time. I went to the market for a fresh bouquet of sunflowers. I placed them in a vase on the entryway table. I cleaned the house, though it was already clean. I took the pot roast from the refrigerator and began its slow preparation. The aroma of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen. I set the dining table with my mother's china, the silverware polished, the water glasses sparkling. Everything was ready. It was a perfect setting for a family dinner. It was also a perfect setting for a reckoning. The two things, in my mind, were no longer in conflict. One would lead to the other. I had sown the seeds of this moment from the second I had chosen to investigate instead of weep. Now it was time for them to bear fruit. The pot roast was in the slow cooker, filling the house with its scent. The table was set. The folders remained in my desk drawer. It was Thursday, 3 days before the dinner. The domestic preparations were complete. Now I needed to fortify my position. I had evidence, but I needed to understand its power. I needed counsel. I picked up the phone and called Brenda. We had been friends for 20 years, since we served together on the library board. She had retired from family law, but kept her license active. "Ellie," she answered, her voice warm. "I was just thinking I should call you. How are you?" "I'm managing," I said, "but I need to ask a professional favor. Could you spare an hour for a cup of tea? There's a matter I need to discuss in confidence." The warmth in her voice shifted into professional alertness. Of course, my house or yours. Somewhere neutral, I think. The cafe on Maple Street. I can be there in 30 minutes, she said. Thank you, Brenda. I gathered my documents. I placed the copies of the bank statements, the county's copy of the forged deed, my chronology, and the tenant's information into a separate, unmarked folder. I did not bring the originals. I drove to the cafe. It was a quiet place with small round tables and the smell of baked goods. Brenda was already there, seated in a corner booth. She stood and gave me a brief, firm hug. She searched my face. "You look tired," she said. "I haven't been sleeping well," I admitted. We sat. I ordered tea. She ordered coffee. When the server left, Brenda folded her hands on the table. "All right, Ellie, what's going on?" I opened the folder. I did not hand it to her immediately. "I have discovered that my son and daughter-in-law have committed fraud against me. I have evidence. I need to know what my options are, legally and practically. I want to be prepared before I confront them." Brenda's expression grew still. She nodded once. "Show me." I handed her the documents one by one, in the order I had assembled them. First, the bank statements with the highlighted charges. Unauthorized withdrawals set up after Marcus tampered with my phone. Next, the photo of the empty drawer and my note about the watch. A personal item of Robert, missing. Then, the copy of the forged deed. The deed to my rental property was taken from my safe deposit box. This document shows it was transferred to an LLC they created. The signature is a forgery. I did not sign this. I did not appear before this notary. Finally, my note about the tenants being redirected. Brenda examined each paper with a lawyer's detached focus. She spent the longest time on the deed, comparing the signature to a known sample I provided, a check from my purse. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is a felony, Ellie," she said quietly, looking up. "Forgery of a deed, theft by deception. The unauthorized access to your financial account is also criminal. The value of the property puts it into the category of grand larceny." I absorbed the words. Felony was a cold, heavy term. It made the betrayal even larger. "What do you want?" Brenda asked. "Do you want to press charges?" I took a sip of my tea. It was too hot. "I don't know yet. My primary goal is restitution. I want my property back in my name. I want the stolen money returned. I want an admission of guilt. I want to set terms for any future relationship if there is to be one. I want to do this without the police if possible, but I need them to know the police are an option." Brenda nodded slowly. "Okay, that's a clear objective. Legally, you are in a very strong position. This document," she tapped the deed, "is a fraudulent instrument. It is void. You can file a quiet title action to have it declared invalid and restore your ownership. That is a civil process. The criminal process is separate. You hold all the cards here, Ellie." "What about the notary?" I asked. "That's a serious matter for them. If they stamped a document without properly identifying the signer, they could lose their commission and face penalties. That's leverage, but it's a messy avenue. I'd focus on Marcus and Chloe. If I confront them with this, and they refuse my terms, what is my next step?" "You file a police report," Brenda said without hesitation. "You give them everything you've just shown me. The paper trail is clear. Given the amounts and the forgery, an investigation would be likely. It would upend their lives. They would know that." "I want them to know that," I said. My voice was steady. Brenda reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "I am so sorry, Ellie." I did not pull my hand away. The human contact was a stark contrast to the clinical discussion of felonies. "Thank you for the advice and for the sympathy. I need both right now." We finished our drinks. Brenda made notes on a legal pad she had pulled from her bag. She outlined the steps for a quiet title action, the name of a reliable real estate attorney, and the exact wording I should use to describe the crime if I needed to file a report. "Be factual, just like you were with me. Date, time, document, consequence." I drove home, Brenda's notes beside me. I felt a new layer of resolve, hardened by professional validation. My evidence was not just a personal collection of hurts, it was a legal case. That evening, I made one more call. I dialed the non-emergency number for the police department and asked for Detective Alvarez. I had met him several times through a community outreach program at the library. He had given a talk on preventing elder fraud. Detective Alvarez, this is Alina Vance. We met at the library last spring. Ms. Vance, of course. How are you? His voice was polite, professional. I'm well, thank you. I'm calling because I may need to file a fraud report in the coming days concerning a family matter. It involves a forged property deed and financial theft. A lawyer friend has advised me on the civil aspects, but I wanted to inquire about the proper procedure for the criminal side, should it become necessary. There was a brief silence on the line. I'm sorry to hear that, Ms. Vance. That's a serious situation. The procedure is straightforward. You would come to the station, fill out a report, and provide any evidence you have. Given the nature of what you've described, it would be assigned to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit for investigation. Would such a report become public immediately? Not immediately. The investigation would be confidential until charges were filed, if they were filed. Thank you, Detective. That's very helpful. I may be in touch next week. I'll be here, he said. Take care, Ms. Vance. I hung up. The network was now in place. Legal advice from Brenda. An understanding of the police process from Detective Alvarez. My own evidence, organized and factual. I was not a vengeful mother acting in secret rage. I was a wronged party preparing a measured response with full awareness of the authorities and consequences. I returned the folders to my desk drawer. The pot roast aroma still lingered in the house, a promise of a normal Sunday dinner. The normality was a facade, but the structure beneath it was stronger than they could possibly imagine. They thought they were dealing with a mother. They were dealing with an archivist, a woman who understood the permanence of records and the weight of evidence. They had written their crime onto paper. On Sunday, I would read it back to them. Sunday arrived with clear skies. I woke at 7, as I always do. The house was silent. I performed my morning routine: shower, dress, a simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit. The normalcy of these actions was a deliberate choice. Today required steadiness, and routine fosters steadiness. By 10, I was in the kitchen. I took the pot roast from the refrigerator where it had marinated overnight. I placed it in the slow cooker with the vegetables and turned the setting to low. The meal would be ready by 6, tender and flavorful. I prepared a salad, covered it, and put it back in the fridge. I made the dough for rolls and set it to rise on the counter. The physical work of cooking was meditative. It occupied my hands and allowed my mind to remain clear, focused on the sequence of the evening. At 3 in the afternoon, I went to my desk. I took out the 3 manila folders. I opened each one and verified the contents one final time. Financial discrepancies, property records, personal effects. The documents were in order. I closed the folders. I walked to the dining room. The table was already set with the china, silverware, and glasses from the night before. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, my usual seat. I placed the 3 folders on the tablecloth in front of that chair, aligned neatly side by side. They were the centerpiece. I then adjusted the other chairs. I moved the 2 chairs that would be for Marcus and Chloe so they were positioned directly opposite the head of the table, facing the folders. They would be looking at the evidence as they sat. I pushed them in, so they would have to pull them out to sit down, giving them a moment to observe the setup. I stepped back and surveyed the scene. The dining room was warm with afternoon light. The silverware gleamed. The water glasses were empty, waiting. The folders sat in the middle of it all, a stark manila interruption in the expected tableau of a family dinner. It was exactly as I intended. I returned to the kitchen. I checked the pot roast. The aroma was rich and deep. I punched down the risen dough, shaped it into rolls, and placed them on a baking sheet to rise again. I set the table for dessert, placing small plates and forks on the sideboard. At 5 o'clock, I went upstairs. I changed into a simple navy blue dress, one I often wore for nice occasions. I brushed my hair, knotting the silver strands in the mirror. My face looked composed, perhaps a little more lined than usual, but calm. I applied a small amount of lipstick. I wanted to look like myself. This was not a performance of anger or grief. It was a presentation of fact, and I needed to be the calmest person in the room. Back in the kitchen, I put the rolls in the preheated oven. I took out the butter dish to let it soften. I made a pot of coffee and set it on the warmer. I filled a pitcher with water and ice. Every action had a purpose. Every item had a place. The house was ordered, clean, and filled with the comforting smell of a home-cooked meal. It was the stage, and I had dressed it perfectly. At 5:45, the rolls were golden and cooling on a rack. The pot roast was ready. I transferred it to a serving platter and covered it with foil to keep warm. The salad was in its bowl. Everything was prepared. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. I looked at the table one more time. The empty chairs, the waiting folders. The sunlight was lower now, casting long shadows across the floor. In less than 15 minutes, they would arrive. I felt a strange stillness. The investigative work was done. The legal groundwork was laid. The meal was cooked. There was nothing left to do but wait. The anxiety I had expected did not come. Instead, there was a resolute clarity. I had moved from being a victim of their secret to the architect of its revelation. The power had shifted, and they did not know it yet. I heard a car door shut outside, then another. The sound was sharp in the quiet street. I did not move from the doorway. I listened to their footsteps on the front walk, the murmur of their voices. They were laughing about something. The sound was light, carefree. It was the laughter of people who believe they are clever and unexposed. The doorbell rang. Its chime echoed through the house. I took a slow breath. I did not hurry. I walked from the kitchen, through the living room to the front door. I could see their blurred shapes through the frosted glass. I placed my hand on the doorknob. I turned it and opened the door. Marcus and Chloe stood on the porch. Marcus held a bottle of wine. Chloe held a small bouquet of orchids, cellophane wrapped. Their smiles were wide and easy. "Mom," Marcus said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. "Something smells amazing." "Hello, Ellie," Chloe said, presenting the flowers. "These are for you." I accepted the orchids. "Thank you, they're lovely. Please come in." I moved aside. They entered the familiar hallway, shedding their coats, still chatting. Marcus headed toward the dining room, likely to put the wine on the table. Chloe followed. I closed the front door. The lock engaged with a soft click. I remained in the hallway for a moment, holding the orchids. I listened. The conversation from the dining room stopped. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a broken scene. Then a small, sharp sound. It might have been Chloe's clutch purse hitting the floor. I walked toward the dining room, my steps measured on the rug. I stopped in the doorway. They were standing just inside the room, side by side, frozen. Marcus was still holding the bottle of wine, his arm slack at his side. Chloe was staring at the table, her face pale, her hands empty. Their eyes were fixed on the 3 manila folders placed squarely at the head of the table. Marcus slowly turned his head toward me. His expression was one of pure, undiluted confusion, rapidly curdling into dawning horror. He looked from the folders to my face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I met his gaze. I did not speak. I simply waited, allowing the sight to settle, allowing the understanding to penetrate. The stage was set. The actors had arrived. The performance could begin. The silence stretched between us, thick and charged. Marcus's face cycled through expressions: confusion, disbelief, a flash of fear. Chloe made a small, choked sound in her throat. Her eyes darted from the folders to me, then back to the folders as if hopping they had vanished. "Mom, what is this?" Marcus finally managed. His voice was strained, the earlier breeziness gone. He gestured weakly toward the table with the wine bottle. "What's going on?" I stepped fully into the room. I placed the orchids Chloe had given me on the sideboard. "Please," I said, my voice level, "sit down." They did not move. They were statues of apprehension. "Sit," I repeated, a little firmer. Marcus moved first, a jerky motion. He walked to the table and pulled out the chair to the right of the head, the one facing the folders. He placed the wine bottle on the tablecloth with a dull thud and lowered himself into the seat. Chloe followed, movements stiff. She retrieved her clutch from the floor and sat beside him. They both stared at the manila rectangles as if they were live explosives. I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit. I rested my fingertips lightly on the back of my chair. "Before we eat," I said, "there are some matters we need to clarify. I have discovered several discrepancies in my affairs. I've organized them here." I reached down and opened the first folder, the one labeled asterisk financial discrepancies asterisk. I lifted the top sheet, the bank statement with the highlighted charges. "This is from my primary checking account," I said, sliding the paper across the table so it lay between them. "These 3 transactions to Home Secure Pro, totaling $1,461.48. I did not authorize these payments. The bank confirms they were enrolled as automatic drafts from my mobile device." I looked at Marcus. "You updated my phone 4 months ago. These charges began the following billing cycle." Marcus's throat worked. That must be some kind of scam, Mom. Those happen all the time. We should call the bank." "I have already disputed the charges," I interrupted calmly. "The bank is investigating the point of enrollment. They noted it was a mobile device, my device." I let that hang. "A coincidence, I'm sure." Chloe's hand crept to her neck. She was not looking at me. I opened the second folder, personal effects asterisk. I placed the photograph of the empty drawer on top of the bank statement. "This is a photograph of your father's dresser drawer, Marcus. His Hamilton watch is missing. It was there 8 months ago, after your visit in January. It is not there now." Marcus's eyes widened. "You think we took Dad's watch? Mom, that's insane. Why would we do that?" "I am not stating what I think," I said. "I am stating a fact. The watch is missing. Its disappearance coincides with your access to my home." "We wouldn't take that," Chloe burst out, her voice pitched high with indignation. "It's not even worth anything." "Its value to me is not monetary," I said, turning my gaze to her. She flinched. "But you are correct. In the grand scheme, it is a small thing, a token." I paused. "Which brings me to the third folder." I opened the asterisk property records asterisk folder. I did not slide this document. I held it up so they could see the county seal, the formal type. "This is a certified copy of a warranty deed, recorded 6 weeks ago. It transfers the title of my rental property at 2147 Elmwood Drive from me, Aliner Vance, to an entity called M&C Holdings, LLC. I lowered the paper and looked directly at Marcus. M&C Marcus and Chloe. The color drained completely from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. "The signature on this document," I continued, placing it on the table and tapping the line with my finger, "is a forgery. I did not sign this. I did not appear before this notary. The original deed was removed from my safe deposit box. You had access to that key, Marcus, when I was ill 16 months ago." This is a misunderstanding," Marcus stammered. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "Mom, listen. That LLC, it was for your protection, for estate planning, to shield the asset from." "Do not lie to me," I said. The words were quiet, but they cut through his babbling like a blade. He fell silent. "The tenants have been instructed to send their rent checks to a P.O. box for M&C Holdings. My income has been diverted. This was not estate planning. This was theft." Chloe began to cry. Not the delicate, pretty tears she sometimes produced for effect, but harsh, silent sobs that shook her shoulders. She covered her face with her hands. Marcus stared at the deed, at his forged signature below my name. The last of his composure crumbled. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a child caught in a terrible act, which, in a way, he was. "You told Chloe not to worry," I said, my voice still even. I quoted the words that had started it all, the whisper from my hallway. "You said, she'll never figure out what we did." I let the sentence sit in the air between us, heavy with its own truth. "I heard you." The finality of that admission broke him. His head dropped into his hands. A low groan escaped him. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of a secret exposed to the light after festering in the dark. I remained standing. I watched them. Chloe wept into her palms. Marcus kept his head down, his fingers gripping his hair. The aroma of pot roast, so warm and inviting, now seemed to mock the scene. I had not raised my voice. I had not called them names. I had simply presented the evidence, piece by piece, connecting each to their actions. There was no defense against it, no way to spin it as a misunderstanding or a well-intentioned error. The documents spoke for themselves. The forgery was undeniable. After a full minute of silence broken only by Chloe's ragged breathing, Marcus lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face etched with a shame I had never seen before. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my son, not the slick financial advisor, not the confident betrayer. I saw a frightened, guilty man. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm so sorry." The apology hung there, feeble against the scale of what he had done. It was a start, but it was not enough, not nearly enough. "Sorry is not a resolution," I said. I finally pulled out my chair and sat down. I faced them across the evidence-laden table. "Now we will discuss what happens next." I let Marcus's apology hang in the air between us. Chloe's sobs had subsided into shaky, hiccuping breaths. The pot roast was cooling in the kitchen. That no longer mattered. "We will go through this step by step," I said. My hands rested on the closed folders. "You will listen. You will answer my questions directly. There will be no more lies." Marcus nodded, his eyes on the table. Chloe wiped her face with a napkin from the setting, smudging her mascara. I opened the financial discrepancies asterisk folder again. The money, $1,461.48. Where did it go? Marcus cleared his throat. "It was a subscription for a home security monitoring service for our apartment. We used your account to pay for it." The admission was mumbled, ashamed. "Why?" "Cash flow was tight for a few months," Chloe said, her voice small. "With the new business expenses for the LLC, we thought you wouldn't notice such small amounts. We meant to pay it back." "You did not ask," I stated. "You accessed my bank account and created a recurring draft. That is theft, regardless of intent." I made a note on a separate pad. "You will repay the full amount, plus any fees the bank charged for the dispute by the end of this week. You will provide me with a bank confirmation of the transfer." They both nodded mutely. I moved to the asterisk personal effects folder. I tapped the photograph. "The watch, where is it?" Marcus looked ill. It's in our apartment, in a drawer." "Why did you take it?" He struggled for words. "I don't know, I saw it that day and I took it. I thought you wouldn't miss it. I wanted to have something of Dad's." His voice broke on the last word. It was perhaps the first completely honest thing he had said. "It was not yours to take," I said, my tone unbending. "You will return it to me in this house by tomorrow evening." "Yes," he whispered. Now the central document. I opened the asterisk property records folder and laid the forged deed flat. "This is the most serious matter. You created a business entity. You forged my signature on a legal document. You filed it with the county. You redirected the rental income to yourselves. Explain this." Chloe started to speak, a defensive tone entering her voice. "Ellie, we were thinking of the future. Managing property is a hassle. We were going to handle everything for you, take the stress off." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Do not insult my intelligence with this narrative. You stole an asset. The forged signature makes this a felony. I have consulted a lawyer. I have also spoken to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit." The blood drained from Marcus's face again. "The police. Mom, you can't." "I can, and I will if necessary," I said. "My lawyer informs me this deed is a fraudulent instrument. It is void. A quiet title action will reverse it and restore the property to my name. That is a civil process. The criminal process is separate. Forgery of a deed is grand larceny." The legal terms landed in the quiet room with the weight of stones. Chloe seemed to shrink in her chair. Marcus put his head in his hands again. "Who is the notary?" I asked. "A client of mine," Marcus said, his voice muffled by his hands. "He did it as a favor. He didn't ask questions." "That is his professional risk to bear. I have his name and seal here." I pointed to the document. "His involvement is documented." I let the implications sink in. The threat of criminal charges was not a bluff. It was the logical, factual consequence of their actions. They were finally comprehending the cliff edge they were standing on. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, lifting his head. His eyes were desperate. "What can we do?" "First, you will provide me with every piece of correspondence, every record for M&C Holdings, LLC. The formation documents, the tax ID number, the records of rent received. Everything. You will do this tomorrow." "Okay." "Second, you will sign a document I will prepare, instructing the tenants that all future rent payments are to be made directly to me, effective immediately. You will provide them with my contact information and a formal apology for the confusion." "Yes." "Third, you will cooperate fully with the lawyer I retain to file the quiet title action. You will provide any necessary affidavits admitting the transfer was fraudulent. You will bear all legal costs associated with this reversal." Marcus nodded, each agreement diminishing him further. "Fourth," I continued, "you will calculate the total rental income you have collected from my tenants since the transfer. You will repay that sum in full with a reasonable interest rate, according to a schedule I will set." Chloe made a small, distressed sound. That was money they had already spent. "Do you understand these terms?" I asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "Chloe." "Yes," she whispered. "This is the path to avoiding criminal prosecution," I said. "My willingness to pursue that path depends entirely on your compliance. If you deviate, if you delay, if you attempt any further deception, I will file a police report with all of this evidence. The choice is yours." I closed the folders. The conversation had taken less than 30 minutes. The food was cold. The planned dinner was over. "There will be no meal tonight," I said. "You will leave now. I will be in touch tomorrow with the documents you need to sign and the instructions for the repayments." They sat for a moment, stunned by the dismissal. Then slowly they pushed back their chairs. Marcus stood, his movements those of an old man. Chloe stood beside him, clutching her purse like a lifeline. They did not look at me. "Mom," Marcus said, stopping at the dining room entrance. We are." "I do not want to hear it," I said. I remained seated. "Actions will speak now, not words. Go." They walked through the living room. I heard the rustle of their coats, the click of the front door opening, then closing. The house was silent again. I did not move. I listened to the silence. It was different from the silence after their last visit. That silence had been shocked and hollow. This silence was full. It was the silence after a storm has passed, when the air is clear and the damage is visible and can now be assessed, and rebuilding can begin. The silence after the door closed was a physical presence in the house. I sat at the dining table for another 10 minutes, listening to it. Then I stood. The folders went back into my desk drawer. I went to the kitchen. I looked at the pot roast, now congealing in its juices. I transferred it to a container and placed it in the refrigerator. I would not waste food. I wrapped the rolls. I put the salad away. I cleaned the kitchen, washing the few dishes I had used in preparation. The normalcy of the tasks was a grounding wire. The next morning, I awoke with a clear objective. The emotional reckoning was over. Now came the administrative reckoning. I sat at my desk with a fresh legal pad. I wrote TERMS of restitution and reconciliation at the top. I numbered each point. 1. Financial repayment. Asterisk Marcus and Chloe Vance will repay the sum of $1,461.48, unauthorized bank charges, plus any associated bank fees, via direct transfer to my account by Friday, 5:00 p.m. 2. Return of property. Asterisk Robert Vance's Hamilton wristwatch will be returned to my possession by today, 7:00 p.m. 3. Rental income. Asterisk Marcus and Chloe Vance will provide a full accounting of all rent payments received for 2147 Elmwood Drive since the fraudulent transfer. The total sum, plus interest calculated at 3% per annum, will be repaid according to a 12-month amortization schedule, with the first payment due in 30 days. 4. Property title. Asterisk Marcus and Chloe Vance will provide all records for M and C Holdings, LLC, and will cooperate fully with the attorney I retain to file a quiet title action. They will bear all legal and filing costs. They will sign any necessary affidavits admitting the fraud. 5. Tenant communication. Asterisk, they will sign a letter I prepare, informing the tenants of the reversion of management and providing my contact information. They will not contact the tenants further. 6. Formal apology. Asterisk, they will provide a written, notarized letter of apology for the specific actions taken, fraud, theft, forgery, to be kept in my records. 7. Probationary period. Asterisk, for a period of 6 months from today, there will be no contact between us. No visits, no phone calls, no texts. This period is for reflection and for the fulfillment of the above terms without emotional manipulation. I read the document twice. It was fair. It was precise. It offered a path to avoid legal destruction, but it did not offer forgiveness. Forgiveness was a separate matter, one that might never come. This was about justice and restoration. I typed the terms into a formal document, leaving spaces for signatures and dates. I printed 3 copies. At 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I answered. Marcus stood alone on the porch. He looked exhausted. In his hand was a small velvet pouch. "Come in," I said. He followed me to the living room. He did not sit. He held out the pouch. "Here it is." I took it. I opened the drawstring and tipped the watch into my palm. The cool metal and worn leather strap were familiar. I turned it over. The engraving on the back, "To R, Love E," was still there. I nodded and placed it back in the pouch. "Did you bring the LLC documents?" I asked. "They're in the car, and we did the transfer for the bank charges. You should see it tomorrow." "Good." I picked up the 3 copies of the terms from the side table. I handed one to him. "These are my conditions. Read them." He took the paper. His eyes moved down the list. He flinched at the word fraud. He paused at the 6-month no-contact clause. His shoulders slumped further. "This is harsh, Mom," he said softly. "It is proportionate," I replied. "You committed felonies against me. You stole my security. You betrayed my trust. This document is the alternative to a police report. It is grace, Marcus. Do not mistake it for anything else." He swallowed, and after 6 months. "After 6 months, you may request to see me. I will decide then if I am willing. There is no guarantee. Rebuilding trust is your task, not mine. My task is to recover what you took." He looked at the paper again. "Chloe won't like the apology letter, the notarized part." "That is not my concern. It is a requirement. Your comfort is no longer a priority in my decision-making." He was silent for a long moment, staring at the terms. Then he gave a single, slow nod. "Okay." "Sign both copies," I said, handing him a pen. "I will keep one, you will keep one. The third is for my lawyer." He took the pen. He signed both copies where indicated, his signature messy. I signed below, my own signature clear and firm. I dated them. "I will email you the tenant letter and the affidavit for the quiet title action by tomorrow," I said. "You will sign them in front of a proper notary and return them to me by the end of the week. You will also provide the accounting of the rent by then." "I will." There was nothing more to say. He stood there, holding his copy of the terms, looking lost in the living room where he had played as a child. "You should go now," I said. "Mom, He trailed off, shaking his head. The words wouldn't come, or the right ones didn't exist. "The clock starts today," I said, my voice final. 6 months. He turned and walked to the door. He let himself out. I did not watch him go. I listened for the sound of his car starting and driving away. I placed my copy of the signed terms in the asterisk property records asterisk folder. I put the folder back in my desk drawer. I picked up the velvet pouch with Robert's watch. I carried it upstairs. I opened the top drawer of his dresser. I moved the tray of cufflinks and placed the watch in the empty space behind it. I closed the drawer. The terms were set. The path was defined. The weight of their betrayal was no longer a secret festering inside me. It was now an external obligation, a list of tasks for them to complete. The emotional burden had not vanished, but it had been compartmentalized, placed beside the facts in their proper folders. For now, that was enough. Weeks passed. The first restitution payment arrived as a direct deposit, noted on my bank statement with the memo, repayment 112. I printed the statement and filed it in the financial discrepancies asterisk folder. The quiet title action was proceeding, handled by the attorney Brenda recommended. The signed affidavit from Marcus, admitting the fraud, had been submitted. The legal process was methodical, impersonal, and exactly what I needed. My days resumed their familiar rhythm, but the quality of the quiet was different. The anxious energy of investigation was gone. The dread of confrontation had passed. What remained was a settled, sometimes sorrowful, but solid peace. It was a Saturday morning. I was in my garden. The summer heat was beginning to soften into early autumn. I wore my wide-brimmed hat and knelt on the cushion, pulling weeds from around the base of my hydrangeas. The soil was cool and damp from the morning's watering. The physical work felt good. My hands were busy. My mind was clear. I heard the mail truck stop, then continue. I finished the row I was working on, stood, brushed the dirt from my knees, and walked to the mailbox at the end of the path. There were a few bills, a gardening catalog, and a postcard from a friend on vacation. Nothing from Marcus or Chloe. That was according to the terms. The silence was both a wound and a relief. I went inside, washed my hands, and sorted the mail at the kitchen table. I opened the catalog, then set it aside. I would look at it later. My book club was meeting here in a few hours. I had prepared a lemon pound cake that morning. The house smelled of citrus and sugar. I made a cup of tea and took it to the living room. I sat in my armchair. The sunlight fell across the floor in a bright rectangle. I picked up the book we were discussing, but I did not open it. I simply sat, feeling the warmth of the sun and the cool of the porcelain cup in my hands. My phone, which was on the side table, buzzed once. A text notification. I looked at it. I did not reach for it immediately. I took another sip of tea. After a minute, I picked up the phone. The notification showed the sender, Marcus. I unlocked the screen and opened the message. It was brief, only 2 sentences. The first payment should be there. I'm working on the rest. I'm sorry. I read the words. I felt a complicated shift inside, a pang of the old hurt, a flicker of cold recognition at his formal tone, and a distant, faint echo of the boy he had been. The apology was not the notarized letter. That was still due. This was something else, a private message. I did not reply. I did not delete the message. I placed the phone back on the side table. The choice to not reply was an active one. It was a maintenance of the boundary I had set. The choice to not delete it was also active. It was an acknowledgement of the possibility, however remote, of something coming after the 6 months. I did not know what that something would be. I did not need to know today. I finished my tea. I stood and went to the kitchen. I took the pound cake from its dome and placed it on a serving plate. I set out cups and saucers, the small dessert plates and napkins. I made a pot of coffee and set out a pitcher of water. The doorbell rang. I smiled before I even reached the door. It was Brenda, always precisely on time. I opened the door. She stood there with a book in hand and a bottle of sparkling cider. "Ellie," she said, her eyes searching mine with friendly concern. "You look well." "I feel well," I said, and I realized it was true. I took the cider. "Come in, the others should be here soon." We went to the living room. She sat on the sofa. "Any news?" she asked quietly, meaning the legal matters. "The payment came through. The court date for the title hearing is set for next month. It's proceeding." "Good," she nodded, satisfied. "And how are you really?" I considered the question. "Quieter. The house feels like my own again. I still have moments of anger, but mostly I feel clear." "That's the best you can hope for right now," she said. The doorbell rang again. 2 more members of the club arrived, then a third. The house filled with the sound of women's voices, laughter, the clink of cups. We settled in the living room, plates of pound cake balanced on knees. We talked about the book for a while, a historical novel about resilience. The conversation, as it often did, drifted to our own lives, to small updates and shared memories. I listened. I contributed. I laughed at a story about a disastrous baking attempt. For those 2 hours, the weight of the past months was held at bay by the simple, sturdy net of friendship. After everyone had left, Brenda stayed behind to help me clear the dishes. We stood side by side at the sink, she washing, I drying. "He sent a text today," I said, the words coming out quietly as I polished a saucer. Brenda paused, her hands in the soapy water. "What did it say?" "That the payment was sent, and that he was sorry." She resumed washing, and I didn't answer. She nodded. "That's probably wise. Let the terms do their work, let him sit with it." That's what I thought. We finished the dishes. Brenda dried her hands and gave me a firm, one-armed hug. "You did a hard thing, Ellie. You did it right." After she left, I turned off the lights downstairs. I walked through the quiet, clean rooms. I stopped at the front window and looked out at the dark street. A sense of completeness settled over me. The story was not over. The legalities continued. The 6-month probation stretched ahead. The future of a relationship with my son was an unanswered question, but a definitive chapter had closed. I had not destroyed them. I had not let them destroy me. I had forced the truth into the light and demanded accountability. I had reclaimed my property, my dignity, and my peace. The revenge was not in their punishment, but in my restoration. It was a quiet victory, one that left no scars but the ones they had inflicted on themselves. I went upstairs. As I passed the door to the room that had been Marcus's, I did not pause. I continued to my own room. I got ready for bed. The last thing I did before turning out the light was to check the lock on my bedroom door, a habit of living alone. It was secure. I lay in the dark. The house was silent, but it was no longer the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a day ended, of work done, of a space that was truly and fully my own. I closed my eyes. Sleep came easily, and it was dreamless.